Welcome to the LAS RETScreen TDX mini virtual workshop on identifying energy savings using this amazing tool called RETScreen. My name is Christian Tam. I'm a municipal program specialist with LAS. And at LAS, our main role with municipalities is to help them to reduce cost. And we do so by developing programs and services. And one of such programs is our energy workshops that we do offer to municipalities. Within the energy workshops, we've got a workshop that specifically focuses on wastewater treatment plant and a treasure hunt for that matter. We come on your site if you want to do the workshop with us. It's together with Steve Dixon and our subject matter expert, Andrea. We come on site to run it with the operators. There are IESO incentives available. If you're a municipality in Ontario, you qualify for IESO incentives. That makes it easier for you, in terms of signing on. It does not become cost prohibitive to participate in our workshop. It's a great workshop. In 2021, we had City of Timmins, and they take the workshop, and in the treasure hunt, they identify lots of savings, energy savings within their plant. When they did it. So I encourage all the Ontario municipalities on board. If this is of an interest, give me a shout. My email will be at the end of the screen. Give me a shout and we can organize something. But for today, we just want to see how we can use this software to identify energy savings. And I will hand over to Kevin to take over from here. Then we can begin. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Christian. Welcome and good morning, everyone, to this webinar with RETScreen and wastewater treatment plants. I always look forward to meeting new people in the energy industry, and I'm really glad to be here with all of you this morning. In my work with RETScreen, my role is to help support our global user community by providing support, training, and capacity building in general. This also includes working with organizations with multiple facilities and helping them get the most out of RETScreen for their portfolio facilities. In fact, I've worked with many of your peers in municipal and regional governments across Canada, and I'm extending that offer to help to all of you. In fact, I see several people that I know in the list of attendees. If not already done, I'll remind you that you can download the RETScreen software directly from the NRCan site. You don't need it to follow along in this webinar, but after, you're welcome to do that. And you can even get in touch directly with us from directly within the software. If you go to the help page on the file worksheet and click on the customer support button, which will open an email that when you send it will go directly to our inbox. Right there where it says RETScreen customer support. So I have the pleasure of introducing Stephen Dixon, an energy management pro for over 40 years. He's worked with tons of industrial, commercial, institutional, and utility folks to help them handle their energy needs. And I've had the pleasure of working with Stephen many times. And I can state unequivocally that his goal is to train people, teach best practices, and share tools for energy management. And that's precisely what he will be doing today. So over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Welcome, everybody. I see a number of familiar faces out there, and I also see a number of new faces, so that's great. So before I begin, thank you for that great introduction there, Kevin. I just want to introduce my friend and my colleague, Andrea Dwight. I've worked with Andrea for many, many years now. Andrea and I have worked together on a number of initiatives with municipalities. I think going back in the 2000s, it was the Audit Plus Plus program and the energy benchmarking program, and now we're doing a lot of these energy treasure hunts in water and wastewater treatment plants. So Andrea is an energy and a wastewater treatment specialist, I guess you would call her. She's got her background is chemical engineering. Andrea, do you want to add anything to that? You're just a great person to work with, though.
Thank you so much. Nice to see everyone here. Yeah, my name is Andrea Dwight, and I'm from Blue Sky Energy Engineering, and as Stephen had said, we've worked together for many years, and we specialize in energy conservation across the municipal and in industrial communities, but we also specialize in both energy conservation and process engineering in water and wastewater facilities. So I'm looking forward to the presentation today, Stephen, and hopefully I can help out where I can.
Yeah, and just so that I can head off any questions that might come up, there is a slide that is at the last part of the deck, which will be distributed afterwards, also the video. But that slide includes all of our names, so you can reach out and contact us at NRCan, AMO, or Andrea and I as well. So I encourage you to talk to Christian about anything you want to do moving forward, because he's kind of the coordinator from AMO's point of view, and then he'll reach out to us as appropriate. So, all right, enough with all the setup. Time to jump in. So the title says Energy Analysis of Water and Wastewater Treatment Plants with RETScreen Experts. So I could take you through the software, which I will do to some extent. But what I wanted to do is to show how RETScreen Expert within the context, and I'm going to pick on wastewater treatment more so because we have some number of examples from that, how it can be used in what we call an energy treasure hunt, which is not an energy audit, which is not an energy or recommissioning. It's not a level 1, 2, 3 or an energy audit. It's basically an entity unto itself, and I'll explain what it looks like. But it's overall, it's an engagement of people who may staff and work with, manage and supervise your plant. So it's a way to really involve everybody in the process of finding opportunities. And we use RETScreen quite heavily in these treasure hunts to evaluate opportunities. So without more ado, what I want to do, though, to begin with, and where this webinar came from was really the fact that Andrea and I, over the past year, have created for RETScreen, and a number of experts have created archetypes for RETScreen. So archetypes are, if you look at the word archetype, what's the definition of the word archetype? It's something that's very typical of many things, okay? So RETScreen has hundreds of archetypes of different types of facilities. In fact, it has archetypes for water and wastewater treatment plants. It has archetypes of moving a plant to a 30 to 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions or an 80 to 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Those are accessed from what's called the virtual energy analyzer. Now, there are many workshops that introduce you to RETScreen, so I'm going to kind of do a thin slice of it today. I will go back and I will open up RETScreen and take you through this just to jump in. And then what we'll do is after I've done this, I'm going to walk through this treasure hunt idea, and I'm going to show you how we use the bits and pieces and functions of RETScreen all throughout to really solve the problem or find those opportunities. So in that sense, it's a practical application. So as I said, Andrea and I worked on the development of these archetypes, and they're accessed from the virtual energy analyzer on the main screen. So getting started, top of the list is virtual energy analyzer. So if you download RETScreen tomorrow and you don't have a license, you can still do this, I believe. Kevin, you can correct me on that one, but I think people can still see the archetypes without a license, correct? If you just download the viewer version, is that correct? Jump in here, Kevin. Anyway, I'll keep going and you can jump in. So basically, when you go into the archetypes, what you can do then is that correct, Kevin?
Yeah.
Yep, good. So even without buying a subscription, you'll be able to download and you'll need probably admin rights to your computer to download and install it. But once you've done that, you can go in here and you can click Virtual Energy Analyzer. You can go down here to, well, let's pick Commercial Institutional, and we're going to go to Services, because that's where I know where these things are buried. Now, I don't have a gas station, but I actually want to look at a wastewater treatment plant, and I want to look at what could be done to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 90%. So I can do the same thing for a water treatment plant. Maybe I don't want to be as aggressive. I can go to the 30 to 40% archetype. So there's 4 different archetypes in here you can look at. All right, so I'm going to click on that one. Now it says, where is your plant? Okay, where is your plant? So I'm going to take this pin right here on the select facility location. I'm going to stick it sort of somewhere to the west of, somewhere between Toronto and Kitchener, Waterloo, St. Jacobs, where I live, right? So actually, I'm pretty close to where Andrea lives in Mississauga there, right? So I'm going to stick that down there. Whether there's a plant there or not doesn't really matter. What this will allow me to do, though, is access weather data, right, and climate data for that location, right? Weather data is daily, climate data is the longer term averages, but that data is used in the RETScreen archetypes, and we need to make sure that's done. So now I've asked RETScreen to go ahead and build my archetype. And what I'm going to do is I'll give you a quick tour of what the archetype looks like, and then we'll take a look at this treasure hunt thing. We'll walk through a treasure hunt in a sense using what we call our 7-step methodology, and we'll see how RETScreen can be used in all these different places. All right, so this is the climate data that RETScreen will use if we ask it to. So if we ask it to analyze the heat loss from a building, or if we to ventilate, say, a process area, then this is the data that we'll use for temperature. If we use it, we could use it for air conditioning the offices, so it uses the cooling degree days. So it's got lots of functionality here. All right, so on the facility page in RETScreen, that's where we actually establish what the facility looks like in general terms, sort of the firmographics. We have a nice little picture we can put in here. RETScreen has default pictures, but I like to lay my own pictures in here. We even have the ability to do a bit of benchmarking in RETScreen. What I like to do is use a number of benchmark sources, including RETScreen, and then combine them all together and display them on my facility page. I also have the ability to do more granular RETScreen, which is what we call, benchmarking, which is based on the individual fuels, not the total energy consumed. So here we have the more detailed benchmarking page. And I'm going to demonstrate, where I get some other benchmark values once I get into the example of the treasure. All right, now in RETScreen, we can do a number of things. We can look at feasibility. This archetype is largely about feasibility, which is change this system to that system and see what happens, all right? But we can also use it to do performance analysis, which is where I'm going to demonstrate this later, where we take, say, the energy required by a plant and the flow through the plant and the outside temperatures, we combine those together statistically, and we develop some statistical analysis of how the plant's performing. Energy performance analysis. We'll also look at time series data for electricity data, maybe even gas data for that matter. But this archetype really focuses on this feasibility piece. So I'm going to go to the energy tab, and here I see a table which shows all the different pieces of equipment. So this is the work that Andrea and I did. We took a number of examples of plants that Andrea has worked upon, and we sort of combined them all together and tried to make a plant that's very typical of others. Now, obviously, that's going to be difficult in some of these cases. Wastewater treatment plant can have very specific pieces of equipment. Water probably is a little bit more uniform than wastewater, correct, Andrea? Wastewater tends to have a lot more variations in terms of the flavors, if I can use that word. So within the systems that we find in a plant, we have the heating systems, the cooling systems, we have the building envelope, we have the ventilation systems, the lighting, miscellaneous electrical equipment that can include some process equipment. We have hot water systems, we have pumps, we have fans, a lot of pumps in these plants, obviously. We have process electricity. So obviously the one I've opened up here, if I go back to this wastewater, we've got UV disinfection, right? And then we have also process heat where we deal with the digester, right? And then we can add to the system renewable systems like solar hot water heaters or photovoltaics, a small and a large system, and maybe even an offsite renewable, which is something like an offset. If you're buying, say, green power from a particular provider, you can add that in here to take your plant to essentially net zero carbon. Now, what's interesting is on this page right now, and I can see the same things over here on the left side, this is the whole tree of all the equipment in the plant. Now, what RETScreen is showing me right now is the fuel saved, okay? What that means is how much have I saved of what each of these different areas uses. RETScreen talks about fuel as anything you purchase, including electricity. But on this page, it's pretty cool because I can go through here and I can pick projects. Let's say I don't want to do the photovoltaics right now, so I can turn those off. And what it does when I turn all of them off, it brings my payback back to 7.4 years. This is the payback, right? So simple payback, which is cost compared to savings. And so I can tune a basket of opportunities here. So at a very high level, once I've done all the analysis, once I've figured out where the energy goes, once I've figured out how much I can save in each area, then I can come in here and start to build a basket of opportunities that I can take forward for funding. And the one thing everybody wants to know, well, how much carbon is this going to save? All right, so I can go over to the emission page right here very quickly, right? See, using the factors that prevail in the province where this is built or where this is applied, I can actually see the carbon reduction of 87.7%. And if the carbon factor happens to change, right now we've got it at 0.026, we can change that number and it will adjust that accordingly. It also states the carbon reduction in equivalences, in this case, 169 cars and light trucks taken off the road. All the actions we took in this plant with a 7-year well, actually not with a 7-year payback. If I go back and I'm going to turn off the photovoltaics just for fun here, just to see if let's say we don't want to take it quite that far yet. We're going to approach or make ourselves net zero ready. Go over to my emissions. It didn't make that much difference because really it's the electricity in the grid that I'm displacing with those photovoltaics. And that only contains a very small amount of carbon. So I can get to near net zero ready and with an 86.5% reduction, displacing the same amount of energy as 167 cars, or same amount of carbon as 167 cars. Now, in addition to all the technical things that RETScreen can do, right, which is really summarized in this page, and in fact, I can look at the fuel consumption in the base case, the way it is today. I can look at the fuel consumption in the proposed case the way I want it to be, right? And then obviously the savings are the difference between those two things. But let's say I want to drill down. Where does all that come from, right? If you're looking at these archetypes, where did that come from? Well, let's go to the office, for example. I do a simple one to begin with. Well, maybe not quite so simple. So this is the building envelope. So in this case, we implemented a temperature control system going from 24/7 in the offices to something, well, it says office proposed case. So I'm going to go over to the schedules here, and it says office proposed case. So I'm going to go to a 12-hour a day operation where I set back and set up temperatures when the space isn't occupied. So, without getting into too much more detail, you can see that very quickly there's lots of opportunities to build out a pretty complete picture of your operation. Now, I've built much simpler versions, and I've done it on much smaller plants, and it might only take 6 or 10 or maybe 12 different entries. This is a fairly extensive one, but it's a pretty interesting one as well when it comes down to it. If you're into wastewater treatment plants, they're pretty interesting things, right, Andrea? You like the chemistry there. I'm sure you'll have something to say later on about that. So now the other thing I should just show you here at the bottom of all these screens, so when you go into the archetype, it'll describe the archetypical plant that we, in very simple terms, that we analyzed. And then it shows what measures were put in place. So these were all the measures that we built into this system, right? And those measures then obviously are detailed as the difference between, I'm going to take a pump here where we made some savings, a raw sewage pump. What do we do here? Well, we went from a standard efficiency motor on a pump running at a constant speed to a variable speed drive with a premium efficiency motor. So that took a big chunk out of the energy there. So we analyzed speed control on that raw sewage pump. Now, obviously, you have to be careful when you're changing, that pump. I mean, you don't want to get into a situation, Andrea, but where you flood your incoming wells, right? So you've got to make sure that system can respond appropriately to surges and flow and things like that. But I mean, there are opportunities. So RETScreen is not an expert. RETScreen is an expert program, but RETScreen is not an expert at what you do. So that's something I always want to emphasize about if you're using the archetypes in RETScreen, it's always important to remember you're the expert when it comes to the process, right? And you're the one that has to say, well, that may be, I can calculate that in a piece of software, but is it practical and is it safe to do that, right? That's where you have to bring your knowledge as an expert in the area of wastewater or water treatment into the process. And I know when we went through this, Andrea constantly did that to me. She said, Steve, we can't do this, but we can't do that. So I kind of played the energy guy, and Andrea, was that sort of check and balance, right? To make sure that we didn't put something in here that was just really not appropriate. So that is a very quick overview of the archetypes in RETScreen. One thing I will show you is that you can actually generate a report pretty quickly here. RETScreen has an online report generator where you get a nice report which summarizes everything that you've come up with. It actually shows you then sort of the summary of the savings. Also, so you can build this report relatively quickly. The neat thing in RETScreen too is by consequence of building a model for the entire facility, you also actually build out a picture of where all the energy is going or where all the energy is being saved as well. So you can create these nice pie charts as you go through. I don't think it's populated here, which it isn't, but there is a custom dashboard page where you can go in and you can actually build a page very custom based upon all the different pieces of information that you have available in the software. So if you go to the RETScreen YouTube page or YouTube learning page, you'll actually see how to use that custom report writer. So powerful tool. I'm not going to go into it today. All right. So that's basically an overview of an archetype in RETScreen. Remember, there's 4 of them. The one I picked on was wastewater treatment, 80 to 90% reduction in carbon. So that's basically what we're seeing here. But we can go and we could look at any of the other ones too. I can simply flip over here and I could go to let's just go to the water treatment plant here, right? And just have a look at that one too. I made some changes. It's going to remind me, did I want those changes that I made? No, I was just moving to the group here. So I'm going to say no. Okay. So let's just wait for a second. So it's now going to build this water treatment plant, right? So here we go. And we look at facility. So here we see the process diagram, a little bit about benchmarks, right? We go to the energy page, have a look what we got here. It describes the type of plant that we have here in very relatively simple terms for anybody that's an expert at this. I mean, it's a pretty high level description, but it also describes the measures that were put in place. And again, just like we had in the wastewater treatment plant, maybe with a little fewer items, we see that opportunities, right? So, and I'm going to go through then sort of how we search for opportunities in a plant, but we may use a number of these things. Andrew, is there anything you want to particularly highlight, any of these, before I move to the treasure hunt aspect? I wanted to start off by saying, okay, this is what an archetype is. This is how RETScreen handles these types of plants, and then how we use it as the next step.
And I guess our intention is that this could be, a really good baseline to start your models. And so I believe these are fully customizable. So
Absolutely.
Often you may have way more pumps or different types of technologies, and perhaps this is only 50% representative of your facility, but at least it's a starting place, and it's got a lot of the data in there already. And so then you can add pieces of equipment, and that's for a different day for training if you haven't used RETScreen.
Yep.
But then you can add extra pumps or equipment or miscellaneous equipment. We've also added in a few different buildings, and we know that every site is different, so they may have one building or many. So again, as I said before, it's once you get used to it and you can train, it's fairly easy to add buildings, remove them, and make sure that you're getting a little closer representation to your actual facility.
Yeah, so let's say I didn't have these lights right here. I can remove, so I go over here to lights, and if I can get it right there, I right click on it, I say delete those lights, so that removes that particular lighting system. But I want to add another one in, or let's say I wanted to add another building envelope area because I had an outbuilding. So I go to building envelope, right, and it creates another building envelope entry right here, right, and I can call this outbuilding, right. So now I can actually customize this. If I could type today, it would be great. There we go. So I can now customize that to my own circumstance. So you can use these as examples. You can delete from them, you can add to them, or you can simply use it as an example. What I like to do sometimes is to put it over here on one screen, and the other screen I start with the fresh, and okay, how did they do that? Okay, I'm going to go through, I'll add those things myself. It really depends on how you approach it, but I find that sort of starting with a clean slate and looking at an example and then building it myself, I learn more, which I'm always doing with RETScreen. Kevin Burke always says nobody knows everything about RETScreen because there's so many people that collaborate to build it, and it's true, right? So I learn as I do it that way, and the other thing is I don't end up with things in my file that I don't want. That's the other thing I'm always fearful about. If I don't delete something, it may hide in behind there, and it may cause me grief. So I like to start with a clean slate, build it up myself, but use the archetype as the example that I'm going to look at. So, Kevin, do you have any other ways that people use archetypes?
One of the newer things that you have in your software now is at the top, we have the scaling-update. So that, if you click on that, you'll see the dialog. We can take your existing archetype and scale it up or down to match your current size of your site. And all of the energy consumption numbers and costs and the fuels and everything will be scaled up and down and pasted into the RETScreen user-defined model. So it sort of summarizes all of this, but at any scale. And like I mentioned in one of the chats, is that we're continually adding to these archetypes, right? So we have the 30 and 40% of energy savings, and now we have the emissions savings. And the idea with the archetype is it should get you 50 to 80% of all the pain of doing data entry and figuring everything out. The archetypes are there and they work and they're valid, and then you just update them using add, duplicate, delete, like you just did there, Stephen.
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention here too is I'm going to go into, say, this high lift pump here, that if you're wondering about costs, right? So the archetypes here have costs inserted into, this is the capital cost to install this drive. But if you're not quite certain about what those costs are, RETScreen has this super powerful feature that's a $ right here, and I can go in, and these are contextually sensitive, meaning if I'm in the pump one, then it's going to come up with pump costs, right, for me. So there are a lot of context-sensitive costs in here. If we get into some of the, I'm going to go down to the photovoltaics here. if I'm looking, it's got a shopping bag, right? Here we go, Andrea, shopping bag, right? So we can go shopping for a photovoltaic system, right? And there's actually a product database in here as well, not just a cost database, but a product database. So we can go shopping for something that might fit our circumstance. So there's lots of ways to help you sort of get to first base with these, with these analysis. You don't have to start from scratch. We did a webinar with a consulting firm the other day, and they were using spreadsheets to do all their energy audits. I showed them, I took their spreadsheets, thought about what they did, and then showed them how to do it in RETScreen. They were floored at how much time it would save them. And some of their systems were pretty complex. I was a little concerned that maybe their analysis went beyond where RETScreen went, but they were actually totally floored by how good RETScreen was. We compared these things head to head. So it's an impressive tool for anybody who's doing energy, but also, from that point of view, anybody that's in a process area too. There's a lot of good tools within this. So what I'm going to do right now then is flip back into my slide. So I wanted to make sure that as we started this, our primary purpose, our initial purpose, was to demonstrate that there were these archetypes in RETScreen for water and wastewater treatment plants. Now I want to do is to show you how we use those, right? So one of the things that I do when I do an energy audit, energy analysis, or a treasure hunt, is I use a methodology called the 7 steps, right? Basically, and it's a methodology which starts out at what you're purchasing. It works its way through to where it's all being used, and then it asks in a structured fashion, what can you do to get back or get to savings opportunities? So you start out with understanding your consumption price and cost, and all of these steps are nicely supported by RETScreen, right? So we can quantify all of our consumption histories in RETScreen and build a nice report around that. I can compare myself to benchmarks. I can compare myself to myself, meaning I compare the plant that I'm looking at to itself over time, which is kind of like benchmarking. Some people call it monitoring. I call it historical analysis. Or you can compare to other plants as well. And again, RETScreen, I showed you earlier, has that screen where you can enter a benchmark, compare your plant to the benchmarks. RETScreen is really good in the latest rendition or a recent rendition in understanding when a plant uses energy. And what I mean by this is that RETScreen has the ability to take down to 1-minute data, 5-minute data, 15-minute data. This is the kind of data you get from your electricity utility. And analyzing that carefully tells you a lot about what's going on in your plant as well. RETScreen supports that nicely. Now, that isn't part of the archetypes, but it is, and I'll demonstrate it. There is a great example in the RETScreen examples file of how you analyze real-time data. And I'll show you that in my slides coming up. RETScreen also, as you can see, before it does a great job of figuring out where it's all going. I'll just jump back to that one just to show that very quickly. So I can go to my include screen, which is where I see all the measures I have here. I can set this to fuel consumption based case. And if I want a pie chart of where it's all going, right, if I categorize everything properly, then I'm going to get this pie chart like this, right? So I can also, some people, what they like to do is to export this table here. So I can export everything in this table to a spreadsheet file or a CSV file, and that will then allow me to create my pie charts with even more granularity. So RETScreen supports that idea of figuring out where all your energy is going. At that point, now you've sort of broken it all down. Now you got to figure out, what am I going to do? Well, first step, and I have a mantra: waste, efficiency, and supply. First step is get rid of energy you don't need to use. That's waste, right? And that comes down to schedules and times and things like that. Then we want to improve efficiency. We can do it operationally. We can move a pump to a more efficient operating point, right? Maybe using a drive or something like that, or we could change to a more efficient device. But I always like to do the operational thing first, and then we can look at the energy supply options, right? Which could include things like heat recovery and renewables and use of biogas and all those good stuff, right? So that's the structured methodology that we use in Energy Treasure Hunt. The Energy Treasure Hunt really comes down to this idea of a collaborative search where sort of we, the energy people, and maybe often I'll use a subject matter expert. I call Andrea that. Sometimes if I'm in an office building, I'll use a friend of mine who's an HVAC recommission expert, Michelle Perrant. But what we do is we have an energy person, we have sort of a subject matter person for the particular facility, and then we have the folks that operate and maintain the facility. And what we do is we host a sort of a 2-part process. The first part is really a workshop, right? So we start off with a workshop. If we do the treasure hunt over the course of a day, then we would do a half-day workshop. If the treasure hunt is a 2-day event, we would use a 1-day workshop. We would walk people through that idea of the 7 steps. We would embed in it data that we've prepared in advance. So we would build a workshop that's very contextually respective of the operation that we're in. And really, it will familiarize people with the way that facility uses energy. It's based on the idea that we are energy people. We see energy. You are process people, right? In your plants, I'm speaking now to water and wastewater treatment. You see the way those plants operate. What we try to do is bring those two perspectives together, right? Integrate them together through this collaborative process and find opportunities that either the process person or the energy person may not be able to discover on their own, bringing together the 2 points of view. So we start with a workshop. We do a building walkthrough. We'll look at the building through the automation system, whatever that might be, the SCADA system in the case of water and wastewater treatment. But we always do the building walkthrough first. I like to look at what's physical and then come back and look at what the system's telling us about that. Now, in the case of a water and wastewater treatment plant, that may not be that great a difference. When it comes to building automation systems, like in office buildings, things like that, we often see that the biggest liar in the room is the building automation system. It may tell you things that aren't physically true. So look at it physically first, look at the automation, reconcile the 2 points of view. Through that whole process, we're searching for opportunities. We're flip charting ideas. Even at the beginning of the workshop, right, as I say something about maybe how energy behaves in a particular system, somebody even goes, Steve, we got one of those. I think we could do this. So I write that in the flip chart. So we capture ideas right from the get-go in this whole intervention. And the idea is by the end of it all, we're going to have flip charts full of ideas. I'll show you one right at the very end. Actually, I can show you right here. Nope, it's not that one. It's this page here. I don't know. There was 24 ideas. This was one Andrea and I did last year, 24 ideas. And the idea is that we capture the ideas, we put some detail around it, and we put some numbers to it. And that's ultimately, I got to go back to my slide here so I can get back there. Here we go. So our job at the end of it all is to put numbers on those ideas so that when the treasure hunt is over, you've got a list of opportunities, which largely were identified by or in collaboration with your operational staff. And now we have some nice numbers, energy, carbon, and dollars attached to it. So that's in a nutshell what the treasure hunt is all about. The key thing here is to do something at the end of it all. Now, we can look at any kind of opportunity in a treasure hunt, and we do look at many types of opportunities, but I like to focus on the operational opportunities first, the ones that don't necessarily cost significant capital dollars. That doesn't mean we would take the capital stuff off the table. We want to make sure, though, that we build a platform of good operations when it comes to energy and energy efficiency. So that's why we tend to focus more on the operational things to begin with. And that's also the way the 7 steps methodology works. So again, I just put this slide in here. Really, it's just repeating what I've already said. But basically, if you're interested, there's lots of information online about this, but you could probably do this. If you have an energy person, you have a process person, you don't need to reach out to us. You could do this yourself. It's not that difficult to do. It's just a matter of having somebody with some energy perspective. So if you're an energy manager, municipality, you could run these yourself. I really encourage people to do that. I mean, Christian, you said before about my goal, my commitment is to building the capacity of organizations. Absolutely. You know, and we have all the resources. So I'll go even further to say, hey, listen, if you want some of the resources that we use, I'll send them to you. I'm more than happy to do that, right? Because, you know, there's not enough people in the world to do the treasure hunts and do all the searches for opportunities that need to be done. So let's get as many people doing it as possible. All right. So I'm just going to run you through my 7 steps quickly and show you how we use RETScreen within those 7 steps. Now, Kevin, I'm going to add, this is my little request day for you, Kevin. This slide here, I use, but I can't generate this with RETScreen, okay? I don't mean to put you on the spot, Kevin, but it would be wonderful if we could create this graph. All the data's in there, right? Because we have all the data, but I like to use this graph because it really puts things in perspective. Okay, how do my costs break down? You know, if I'm in Ontario, chances are 91% of my costs or something on the same order as that is going to be electricity, and the smaller number is gas. Now, the gas thing is growing, right? But if I look at from the carbon point of view, wait a second, the thing that was the cheapest is now the biggest impact on carbon. And that sort of tells me I've got to work on both sides of the house here to really get my carbon down. I can use the savings financially on electricity sometimes to pay for some of the things that I have to do on the natural gas side of things. I have a friend who often says nobody cares about energy. Well, they care about cost and carbon. Energy tends to be the intermediary in all this. Now, to be fair, you can create this graph very quickly from RETScreen because there is a summary table in RETScreen, but I like to click a button and get the graph. But anyway, sorry, Kevin, about that. But But again, because you are accumulating the information in RETScreen, it's easy to generate this kind of graph. All right, compare yourself. That's the second step. Understand how you compare both to yourself, but also to others. So I like to say, I can use Portfolio Manager. There's a great interface between Portfolio Manager, which is a great benchmarking tool, and RETScreen. I might turn to sector case studies. I've got one highlighted at the bottom, and I'll show you an example of data we pulled from that on the next page. This is one that was put together by the ISO. Many of you in wastewater and water treatment probably are aware of this one, but if you're not, have a look at it. It does some great job of really showing what the range of performances are across the province of Ontario. I also like to look internally, so I like to compare my plant to itself, regardless of anybody else. How has this plant done over time, right? And typically we'll use things like an energy utilization index, like maybe equivalent megawatt hours per megaliter, or it could be gigajoules per meter cubed. Whatever it is, it's usually an energy and a volume when you're talking about water and wastewater treatment plants. Different units, they all amount to the same things. RETScreen actually can be set up to use multiple units of different types, so you're not stuck with one particular unit. This is the study I talked about. So this doesn't come from RETScreen, but I can take this information, embed it into, I can go into the RETScreen screen, and I can input my benchmarks over here, right, that I pull from an external source. So RETScreen doesn't force you to use its internal benchmarks, which it has. You can also input your external benchmarks in here and do your comparisons that way as well. So this is an example. Now, this is a wonderful plant. That red arrow shows where the plant that we analyzed a little while ago, and we still find opportunities in this plant, was operating at about 0.35 equivalent megawatt hours per megaliter, right? So that was really performing well. But that's the kind of graph you get out of that report that I highlighted a little bit earlier. So again, RETScreen has benchmarks. Use external ones as well, Portfolio Manager or sector-based studies. The thing I really like to focus, go ahead, Andrea.
Just to interrupt, just going back to your last screen, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Is I know that everybody knows this, but you do have to be careful with these numbers because of the technologies that change from plant to plant. So just make sure that when you're benchmarking that you're really focusing on Canadian plants if you can, and also technologies that are similar to yours. Otherwise, there may be an apples to oranges scenario.
Yeah, that's what people always say about benchmarks is you can't compare me to that because my plant's not like that one. Actually, that's the truth. That's not just a complaint, and that's the reality of what you just said. You have to be able to make those adjustments or not make that comparison.
It'll never be perfect, but you've got to get yourself in the right group.
Yeah, so this is an area that I think it doesn't really matter what configuration your plant has. I would like to see how a plant compares to itself over time. So what we did here is we used the electricity consumed, the plant flow in units, I believe that was meters cubed, right? And the heating degree days, how cold it was outside. And we correlated these three variables statistically, right? So we developed a baseline relationship, which happened early on in this data set. And they were able to show that the plant operated for a while and then all of a sudden took off, right? Well, this was a process change that took place in this plant. But they weren't, when we showed them this graph, they really didn't realize the impact that it had, all right? So I'm just going to leave with the idea that by looking at the time series data, looking at it historically, using RETScreen to do that, and this is like one of the things RETScreen is incredibly strong at, is this type of analysis. This is a regression and QSUM. If you haven't seen it before, look it up. But a QSUM tells you how you've deviated from your past performance. In this case, an up-sloping QSUM suggests we're using more energy. There was a reason for it, and it was justified in terms of the process. But I demonstrated to the folks in that plant just how you can track these things. And if you re-baseline on that sloping up section, you can then trend how you're doing month to month, or even week to week or day to day if you have that kind of data afterwards. So it's a very sensitive tool for being able to detect even small changes in performance, making sure that you're holding the line in a sense. The next step here says understand when your facility uses energy, the time series plots, right? So this is a plot that comes from utility data. And what we've done here, this is actually electricity consumed by the plant. So it ranges from about 600 kilowatts up to about 1,300 kilowatts. The peak day occurred actually at a day. And what's this here? Well, this dotted line down the bottom via RETScreen, via it accessing NASA data for weather throughout the world, any site in the world, I was able to pull precipitation data for this particular site. And I could correlate this peak demand in electricity to the precipitation that was taking place. Now, obviously, they started to pump that system a little bit earlier for operational reasons, but basically, the peak demand of that plant correlated to a time of precipitation. So that tells you something, right, Andrea, from an operational perspective, right? And if it's too correlated, then you may have too much infiltration as well. So there's, RETScreen can generate that graph. You can pull 5-minute, 15-minute data in. You can automatically get the weather data overlaid upon it. I think it was 15-minute electricity data and 1 hour weather data, which is the limit of the weather data. But boom, you get the graph. You can visualize it very quickly. We use this within our treasure hunts because how many people get to see that graph? Not many, but in a treasure hunt, everybody. You can also do what's called a heat map, right? So this is 1 week. This is a year, right? So going from 2021-06 to 2022-05. So every row here is a week. There's 52 weeks, and every pixel within each row is 1 hour in that week. So 168 pixels across. We can see the lowest. We can see the highest being noon in sometime in March. So that's probably not unexpected, March or April, right? That's a wet season, Andrea, and you know that plant, right? So you can very quickly visualize what's going on. Again, this is a function that's solidly supported by RETScreen. Highly recommend you have a look at it. What's called sub-daily data analysis. And you can also do what's called a load duration curve. You may have seen this on a flow duration, but here we can do the electrical load duration and understand what we can do to minimize the peak demands, if anything. Understanding where the energy is going, by using the archetype I showed you earlier, we could break down the energy use into all those different process areas, and then we can generate these pie charts to see where it's all going, right? So obviously, if we're going to go looking for opportunities, we need to maybe focus on the heat and the mechanical equipment first more than anything else. So that's why I like to do a breakdown, so I know where it's all going, and I know where to put my focus when I'm looking for opportunities, or at least where to start to put my focus. Again, this is a repetition of what I showed you earlier, but you get that detailed breakdown. You can look at ones for those archetypical plants, or you can build one yourself. And you can scale the archetypical plants, as Kevin explained, up and down as well. A lot of the details on how to do a lot of these things are on videos, and I'll show you where you get that, right? So if you go to RETScreen and you go on the home page, you go over to e-learning here. If you click on e-learning, it'll take you to the YouTube, RETScreen's e-learning channel on YouTube. But also, if you're in a particular system, let's say I'm in a pumping system here, right? And I want to know how to analyze pumping systems. There's actually a video on pumps in here. So you don't have to search through hundreds of videos. Once you get in situation and context here, click on that e-learning help link. It's like a context-sensitive help when you get it. The other thing is there's lots of help too available. If I roll over, say it says capacity, what's it asking me? Well, I click it and I get a nice little, and get the little help line here too, right? And some information, usually there's a picture or something behind that. So RETScreen has a lot of help to help us to build out these inventories properly. The e-learning, make sure you take advantage of that. Finding savings, waste, efficiency, and supply, right? So this is where we're gonna eliminate waste, improve efficiency, both operational and technological, look for supply. And RETScreen is actually set up to do this. If you look at the RETScreen interface, basically, if you go in here, there's two things you can do, and you can change the time. That's the big variable when it comes to waste. A lot of times things are running when they don't need to be, or you can change the size of the system. So the end use allows you to deal with waste and efficiency, and then optimizing supply comes from adding things like renewables, wind, solar power, whatever you want. And also there's some heat recovery in here as well, which also comes under the category of optimizing supply. Kevin, you have a point to make.
Yeah, in your ribbon, in the menu at the top, if the rightmost icon that says steps with a little house, you'll see exactly what you showed, but in a graphical format. So yeah, minimize
just
use,
to remind
maximize
you.
efficiency, optimize supply.
Yeah. So RETScreen is built around this methodology as well. So it's kind of like tailored to this treasure hunt process. All right, so let's have a look at how we find savings. The first thing we do before we even talk about waste is understand what we need, all right? So if we're talking about a building, many of you might have heard of existing building commissioning or recommissioning. We always start with the current facility requirement. You have, as water and wastewater treatment facilities, Andrea, what's it called? You have a requirement you have to work to. You can't, there's no negotiating what conditions you have to meet. Those are laid down for you, correct? But anything beyond that, we can claim as waste in a sense.
There's
So we
very
can,
specific requirements for sure.
yeah, exactly. So we can define what those are. I'm not going to go into the details of those, but we can definitely define our requirements. But then we can go looking for waste, which is really things that we can turn off, we can turn down, or we can control better, right? So, and even even in water and wastewater treatment plants, we find lights that are running where they shouldn't be. We find leaking envelopes. Andrew, you've shown me some pretty. I haven't been to all the plants you have, but some pretty bad envelopes, and it's amazing how much electric heat is going to some of those things where you've got like windows that are 30 years old and single glazed, and you got electric heaters sitting right underneath them, right? So, and that's electricity, which is expensive, right? It may not reduce carbon by a huge amount, but it can be used somewhere else more usefully, right?
I totally
Turning
agree with
things
you,
down.
Stephen. Yeah, for sure. And it's unbelievably surprising because we focus so much on the process on these facilities. We often neglect the effectiveness or efficiency of the facilities or the heating systems. That can be huge waste or use of energy that can be fixed up.
So RETScreen again has ways we can turn things off, turn things down with speed controls, volumes, and so on, controlling things. And Andrew, I'm not going to. We don't have a lot of time to go into this here, but one of the things you brought up to me recently, which was kind of cool, actually I got a physics background, not chemistry like you, but you pointed out that sometimes the thing that we do to reduce electricity use in a wastewater treatment plant can actually increase your nitrous oxide emissions, which can have most people may or may not be aware of this, but which has a major impact on global warming, right? Because there's a 298 multiplication factor for nitrous oxide, right? So
something that we don't think about if you haven't looked into it yet, nitrous oxide isn't measured. Like we always are focused on energy conservation and all of the emissions that come with natural gas and electricity use or diesel or whatever, but we don't look at the fugitive emissions, whether it's from if you have a flare on site, how efficient that flaring is and complete combustion, or in this case in nitrous oxide, which again is, as you said, close to 300 times the pound to pound effect of carbon dioxide in the environment. And that comes from mainly the aerobic, the aerated zones. If the situation is a bit stressed, either under oxygenated or over. So, if the process is being run effectively, then you minimize that, but we don't typically measure it, but it's really important.
So if you want more information on that, Andrea's email is here. She has a great report. You can send that report to folks if they ask for that, right? In terms of sort of optimizing for nitrous oxide and other fugitive emissions. So, fugitive emissions. So, so we can control, we can optimize, but we have to make sure that we don't end up with some unintended consequences. Great. All right. So RETScreen, very simply, I showed schedules before. That's another view of the same thing. RETScreen can allow us to optimize the schedules in a building for temperatures. And again, lots of opportunity to do that. It's an auxiliary system in a sense, the heating of the building, but it's definitely an energy consumer. Then we look at maximizing efficiency, right? And this can come down to how we keep things clean, heat exchangers, pipes, ducts, coils, filters, and lubrication, all those things. Combustion equipment, having it regularly tuned up. They're optimizing how systems like pumps and fans and blowers are operated to make sure we're operating the most efficient point. And we're also meeting the needs of the process properly. And then the final sort of category here is changing equipment. But we find a lot of opportunity short of changing equipment. If you've already got turbo blowers, then what do? You can't go to a turbo blower. So you have to actually optimize how you're using that equipment. And Andrew, you've found a lot of opportunities in plants that have actually upgraded to turbo blowers, and you've found opportunities even with that, with the more efficient blowers, but how we actually operate them, how you sequence them. So again, RETScreen has tools for that. It has a fan tool, which can be used for looking at a VFD and an aeration blower. So these are tools that are designed to give you sort of a first step analysis of what the opportunity might be. You may want to do engineering analysis beyond this, but it's going to give you an idea of where it's going to end up, what ballpark you're going to end up in. Is it worth pursuing it or not, kind of thing. Third step in these last three steps, optimize the supply. That's where we look at things like, well, maybe we do want to, buy a green power contract, or maybe we want to make better use of our biogas, right? Either for generating electricity or for heating the facility. But there are some major challenges with that, for sure. Maybe we want to look at renewable energy or heat recovery within the facility, or even the use of heat pumps. All these things really fit into this last category. And the idea is that we want to make sure that we maximize efficiency and we eliminate waste before or in conjunction with thinking about the supply side of things. There's no use in putting a new renewable energy system in to overcome wasteful or inefficient uses of electricity, right? And likewise with heat recovery, when we size the heat recovery and what we really need to use, not on what we were using before, maybe we could have taken some other actions. So doing it holistically, making sure it gets done properly. So again, within the archetypes, we built one which actually took advantage of the biogas that was available in this particular plant that wasn't being used, and we made that available to digester heating, in this case, in the second stage. So without going in a lot of detail, RETScreen can deal with that kind of circumstance. And again, if you have questions about this when you look at these, please send Andrea or I or Kevin an email afterwards. Definitely Christian too, he may flip them over to us in some cases, but we'd be more than happy to explain how any one of these little things, today I've just tried to kind of, give you some, hang the carrot out there, as they say, right? Tempt you to have a look at it and see what you think about it.
Actually, Stephen, there's a question on the nitrous oxide. It's saying, what is the major source of the nitrous oxide that you mentioned as a fugitive emission?
Go for it, Andrea.
I can answer that. Although typically it's a wastewater treatment plant issue, and it's mainly from aerated zones. And it's N2O, and it's formed in the anoxic zones. And it really comes from your secondary treatment areas. And I can go into more detail outside of this webinar. So anybody that's interested can send me an email, and I can send over the actual chemistry that's happening. But if you under aerate or over aerate because your system isn't stable, then you get incomplete chemical reactions back there, and then you'll have evolving N2O.
So without, hopefully I won't be outing Max here, but Max comes from, he's from the dairy industry. So his question really comes from the context of dairy. So I'll let Max and Andrea talk. I'm sure she's got lots of ideas for you, Max.
Sorry,
so.
I did it in context of water and wastewater treatment.
That's fine. That's fine. You didn't know that. So so that's okay.
So please contact me and I can chat with you more afterwards.
Excellent. So just to wrap up here, this is an example of a wastewater treatment plant that we did last year, Andrea and I. As I said, there was 24 opportunities identified. This was done within the day, okay? At the end of the day, we took a spreadsheet, we created this. We actually used flip charts during the workshop, put it all on a spreadsheet. We actually calculated the savings as we went, right? And we found, I think in this plant, which was performing very well, it was actually very low in terms of the scale of and the benchmarks. It was actually performing very well to begin with, very tightly operated. We still found, I think it was about 7% consumption in that, or reduction in that plant, and many of the opportunities were operational. Even when you've got a tight plant, and we've found this with these treasure hunts, even in buildings or any kind of facility, even when they're actually performing very well according to the benchmarks, we still find opportunities. Why? Because I believe it's because it's not us, it's because we've got people in those plants operating who have ideas, and numbers have never been put to those ideas. So the treasure hunt, using RETScreen and other tools, but a lot of RETScreen allows us to really put numbers and to bring those ideas to life, so we can uncover things that maybe hadn't been uncovered before. Actually, when we were doing the water treatment plant in one facility, I remember they had an emergency. They had an engine-driven pump, which they never used for years and years. And the electrician in the pump said, the best thing you can do in your pump sequence is take that pump, put it in, put an electric motor on it, and actually run it as part of the pump sequence. When we did the analysis in that plant, what we discovered was that there was a big gap in their pump sequence. They would jump from one pump to I think 2 pumps, but because they didn't have the right size pump, there was a big gap and they were actually operating more energy less efficiently than they had to. That pump, which the electrician said would fit in that gap, was perfect, right? But nobody believed them until we came along and showed the energy numbers. So again, the ideas can come from your operating staff. They have a lot of good ideas and we can help put some numbers to it, or a treasure hunt can help. I should say a treasure hunt can help put numbers to it. Just to point out that what Andrew pointed out before, a lot of times there's opportunities in water and wastewater treatment plants that are in the supporting systems. They aren't in the actual process systems. RETScreen supports that quite nicely. Compressed air systems is a big one that RETScreen has a great model for, fans and HVAC and so on. And then there's the process systems. But if you walk through one of those archetypes, you'll see how pretty much every one of the opportunities we have here is articulated in those archetypes, and savings are calculated for them. So I would encourage you to download RETScreen if you haven't. If you've already got it, crack open one of those archetypes, have a look at it. And those archetypes are available for many other types of buildings, not just water and wastewater treatment, but today we are talking about water and wastewater treatment. So have a look at it, see what you think, send us any questions that you might have, and I'm going to flip it back to Christian and Kevin to wrap us up with 1 minute to go.
Sure. Thank you, Stephen. Truly, this has been drinking from the hosepipe scenario. No doubt about it. We've really drunk from the hosepipe, and that's,
as long as this is the water treatment plant.
Exactly. But on a serious note, this goes to municipalities from Ontario that are out there. If you want a full one-day session, we will come on your site and do the workshop with the operators. There are IESO incentives available. We posted the link in the chat. Please, my email is right there. Give me a call and we can chat and see how we can make that happen. But otherwise, thank you so much, Stephen, for the exposure to RETScreen and the amazing things it can do. And thank you, Andrea, also for your subject matter insights, regarding nitrous oxide and the other stuff that are out there. We don't know. I didn't know about nitrous oxide until you said it. So that's certainly amazing. And thank you, everyone, for joining.